Here. Hello, everyone. See people coming in. Beth, Laura, Diana, uh, Nikki, Patricia, welcome. Wendy, if you can tell us where you're tuning in from, we'd love to know. Looks like we have more people coming in. That's wonderful. Uh, yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. What brought you here today? Uh, Washington, D.C. Welcome, Laura. I myself am a couple miles west of the museum this evening. I am not there. This is a virtual background. Um, and Pamela's are you in Ontario this
I
evening, Pam?
am. I
Okay,
am in Ontario.
wonderful. Richard in West Hartford, Diana in South Windsor. Okay, so let's get started. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program for Off the Tracks, a meditation on train journeys in a time of no travel. Virtual programs like this are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lloyd. We are grateful to honor his memory with these programs. And I want to say thank you to our members. I know there are at least a couple of you or a few of you in the audience this evening, the virtual audience. If you're not a member, please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. There are so many benefits to becoming a member. You can receive uh, free or discounted admission to our author programs, the house and museum, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. Please visit our website for more information. Our author this evening is Pamela Mulloy. She has written two novels, including As Little as Nothing. She is the editor of the New Quarterly and director of the Wild Writers Literary Festival. She has lived in the UK, Poland, and the US. And I am the moderator for this evening. I'm usually a host, but I am also moderating this evening. And if you don't know me, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the literary program coordinator at the Mark Twain House Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And I am a lover of trains and train travel. And I am also a writer on my off time from my day job. Um, so that's a little bit about us. During this event, we encourage you to have a conversation with each other in the chat. If you have a specific question, though, please post that directly into the Q&A section. That's at the bottom left of the screen. There are two word bubbles, and you can put your question in there. I will not be monitoring the chat as dedicatedly as I usually do. So if I miss something, I am very sorry because I'll be in conversation with Pamela. And before we get started, I'm going to put the link to purchase the book because I usually do that during the course of the conversation, but I won't be able to this time. All right, so that is all the housekeeping. So welcome, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. Absolutely loved your book. Highly recommend that everyone purchase it.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
yeah, I was telling you earlier that it's not a huge book by size, but in terms of its content, it is quite, you know, it's quite wide-ranging. Can you tell us a little bit about the book for those who haven't read it yet?
Sure. So the book is really, I call it a meditation because it's a kind of a combination of social history of trains, a meditation on travel, and a history, a sort of a travel memoir. So I talk about some of my own travels. So I think what I wanted to do was really think about trains and think about travel more deeply and to kind of explore some of the aspects of it. And just think about what it meant to me. So the kind of that's where the reflective, meditative part of it comes in.
Absolutely. And yeah, I know that you sort of weave different stories in the book. You sort of weave in your own personal history with train travel. In the past, you weave in sort of what's going on in the pandemic as you're writing the book. And you're also weaving history, a lot of history, not only of train travel, but human society or, Western uh, ideas of travel and women and gender. There's a lot in there. Um, what do you think? What for you was the most galvanizing part of those different threads to really go through?
Well, I think I've been thinking about writing about trains for probably 2 decades. I don't know why I was so drawn to trains in that way to want to write about it, and I really didn't know whether I would write something fiction or nonfiction. So it's sort of been just at the back of my mind. I read Wolfgang Schivelbeck's book, Railway Journey, 20 years ago, and I really loved the things that he writes about in terms of time and space and train travel. But so I had this on the back of my mind about what to write about. And then when the pandemic came, and like everyone else, I started canceling my trips, and I just started to think about some of the past train journeys that I'd taken, and really what that particular trip meant to me, or what travel meant to me. So I used those trips as a kind of, I guess, a jumping off point, to talk about some aspect of social history. So the trips were all what they went back to when I was in my 20s, and they were the kind of the starting point for me. But then once I started, I kind of went down many, many rabbit holes of research. And I think that, it's not a comprehensive social history of trains. It was more kind of following my curiosity and my interest in terms of where I went with the research and how I kind of presented the essays or the chapters. So yeah, it was a process that was started with a specific trip that I took, and then just kind of took off from there.
Yeah. Um, what's the earliest train ride that you remember taking?
Well, I did not take trains when I was a child. I don't remember taking a train when I was a child, but when I was in university, I went to university in Nova Scotia, and it was I think about a 3 hour car ride. But nobody had cars, and I mean, my parents had a car, but no student had cars then. So you either hitchhiked or took the bus or took the train. So that was the earliest memory I have. And, in my book, I talk about the fact that I feel like a train is a retreat for me. And in those early memories of the train on going back and forth to the university, I just have this memory of me with a stack of textbooks doing the homework I was supposed to do when I was home and not doing it, and just being gently swayed so that within, a very short time, I would sort of toppled over and fall asleep on my book. So it was my very early memory of train was falling asleep when I was supposed to be doing my university work.
Yeah, I mean things have changed a lot even in the last I went to university not too long ago. But even since I've been to university, things have changed a lot where there's at least in the States where a lot of students have cars. Which is really surprising how quickly that's changed in the last, I don't know, 15 years or so.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of expected. So I know you think back about nobody had a car to go home. They had to either take trains or, the reliance on public transportation was so much
Yeah.
greater.
Yeah. I definitely took a bus and I didn't go to university very far from home and I still took a bus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's really interesting the little nuggets that you dive into in terms of people's relationships with trains, uh, starting as far back as possible. Um, as those of us who like history, we think back maybe a little bit romantically about train travel. And maybe the time period that we're thinking of is maybe more in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when train travel had already been really established and you get a lot more luxury. But can you tell us a little bit about what train travel was at the very beginning, uh, in the 1850s? What was that like for a passenger?
Yeah, for sure. There's a bit of in my research, I came across the story of the first lady of Canada, Lady Agnes MacDonald, who was taking the inaugural trip across Canada on the newly formed railway. And when she went from Ottawa out west, and when she was out in the Rockies, the superintendent showed her the large engine that they were going to have to switch in order to get over the mountains. And she took a look at this train and engine and decided that she actually wanted to ride on the engine. And so for the remaining 600 miles, and she did. So I thought there's just a wonderful image of her just riding this train. And it would have been going about 30 to 40 miles an hour, maybe up to 50 and the downhill slopes. But I think that was interesting for me because that was the early time of train travel. And the fact was that people were actually terrified of traveling by trains. So her doing this, her traveling on this engine was a great act of bravery because it was really against the sort of the norms. People were very frightened of the how fast it was going. 30 to 40 miles an hour was a huge difference. If I came across some information about train travel between London and Birmingham, it would take by stagecoach, it would take 3 to 4 days going at 10 miles an hour. And then suddenly when the train came in, it took a half a day and was doing, 30 to 40 miles an hour. So this really kind of changed the way people thought about travel. And I think what was also interesting is that, we think of train travel as part of the slow travel movement. But for them, it was the jet engine of their day. And there was a lot of people thinking about some of the dangers of train travel, including medical dangers. Uh, Charles Dickens um, estimated that there was 30,000 jolts to the body on a train traveling by train from London to Edinburgh.
Mhm.
I don't know how he calculated that, but but that's what he came up with. He actually was in a train accident, so he was, had a reason to be frightened. But the fact was that there was medical studies done of what the impact of trains would be. The whole idea of even commuters, that people would be kind of harried getting to work, and what would the impact would be on their mental health, on their physical health.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the strangest, a couple of the strangest things that they thought at the time was that train travel was too fast for women because they were not meant to, or not built for that kind of speed. And so they were worried that a woman's uterus would fly from her body if they were on the train. So they also thought that they would stop breathing if they went on the
Yeah.
train. There was an organ, displacement, and there was this whole phenomenon called the madmen on the train, where they were men who would would kind of just go mad on the train. Like they would
Yeah.
start attacking other passengers. I have pictures of the London Press News, London Police News, with illustrations of police trying to kind of control the madmen on the train. So there's a lot of really kind of studies done and thinking about and worrying about this effect of trains in the early days.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially at this time where there is a lot of progression with science, not much on women's health. That won't happen for a long time after. But certainly psychology and other things.
Yeah, I mean, it was so interesting because we talk to people now and they have such a different view of it. For me, I'm thinking about how that difference in speed, we've just become as humanity, we've just become so accustomed to that speed being normal and slow, whereas before things were just so slow. They were just going from stagecoach or horseback or white or walking as a mode of transportation. So
Yeah,
this was just flying, and they often actually referred to the flying, the train flew through the landscape, so that it was just like this jet engine.
yeah. Yeah, I know that you mentioned uh trying to look up how much some distance would have been if you took it at another in another era. I don't remember what the two locations were. It might have been between the UK and Poland that it would take
Oh,
weeks to go over there. And it reminds me of the first time that I read an annotated version of a Victorian novel. They were talking about just like they were trying to, for a modern reader, translate like this is how much the money would be, or this is how much distances would take. And that was like the beginning for me of like, oh, I wonder, this journey that I take all the time. I go to New York City a lot. How long would that have taken, in the early 20th century versus the early 19th century, when you're really just working with literal horsepower.
yeah, well, that was just kind of a fun thing because we actually took the train journey from the south of England to Poland. So there were
Mhm.
several legs of the
Yeah,
trip. And I did a calculation of how fast stagecoach would go. It was not a kind of accurate GPS, but it
yeah,
was breaking it down. And I think I calculated it would take it a couple of weeks, and that's without stopping.
yeah,
You had to kind of then add in overnight stays because you couldn't, when you take stagecoach, you can only drive for like 7 hours a day or something.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, and another thing that really stuck to my mind was, you spoke about the madman and how the construction of the train cars themselves kind of set things up to be, at least in the UK, a little bit not maybe problematic or for safety. There was an issue with crinolines, for example, that I remember from the book, and also just theft, just people killing other people for their valuables. Um,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about just how trains in North America were different from trains in Europe and how they were set up in different ways?
Yeah, well, I think the idea of the carriage and the safety issue was interesting, especially in the early days, because if you've seen old movies where people are in a train and they just all come out of their compartment onto the platform. I
Yeah,
hadn't thought about it before, but when they're in the compartment, they are actually in a locked box. They have no
yeah,
access to they have no access to a conductor or to other parts of the train, and they certainly don't have access to the washroom facilities. So it was there was a whole kind of feeling of distress sometimes in the cabinets in the cabins rather, which really caused a lot of problems, and it became an issue that they had to eventually solve by putting in the corridor of those compartments. Um, and the American system was always a more open plan. And they never and all of the design of the trains started with the stagecoach, the idea of like a stagecoach on wheels. But the American system when I read about it was that it was based on the fact that in America land was cheap, but the labor was not. So they wanted to drive. They could drive. They could make the railways around obstacles, and then eventually they were able to kind of have a flexible wheel system that allowed them to go around those curves, which meant that they could construct a car that was more efficient and longer and you know, it could hold more people. That so there's that aspect of it too. But I also read about the kind of cultural differences too, because they said, in Europe, they wanted the privacy of the cabin, and they wanted to have that very small group of people, whereas in America, they were wanting to have a more open, sort of a jovial kind of an environment. So I think it was kind of interesting that was both the construction and also the culture that helped to form the design of the trains.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know why this came to mind, but somewhere where you can visually see that is in Downton Abbey and The Gilded Age, which are both Julian Fellows shows of
Mm,
you know 19th century or early 20th century America and the US or and England. And I just remember scenes from those TV shows where, you know, you can see that at in action. The opening straight onto the platform in England. And then the more sort of democratic because there was also there was segregation depending on where you
absolutely.
were.
Yeah, that because the trains in England particularly had third class, so that would have been an open car. But
Yeah.
yeah, it would have been like the first class would have been definitely the one with the compartments. And it's a very interesting environment. I've had an opportunity to travel on some of those trains in Poland and in the Czech Republic, and there's a very interesting intimacy that happens because you're just six of you in this compartment, and you can do you make eye contact and try to chat, or can you
Yeah.
be in your own private space, so having not been used to it, it was interesting to experience it.
That reminds me that's one of the parts in the book where I felt a little uneasy was in the very beginning when you talk about being on this journey with your daughter and going to the dining car and sort of being paired up with two other random people. And I'm not, I would say I'm an ambivert. I'm especially because of this job, I'm pretty good at talking with people. But if I were on a train that's essentially a hotel because I'm like, you're staying overnight and like to go to dinner with two strangers, I'm just like, oh God, I'm gonna have to figure out what to talk about with them.
Well, I would probably have agreed with you if I hadn't had the experience, because I'm an introvert and I can be sociable, but I am an introvert. So it's not my natural, kind of way of being. But I think what is interesting, I kind of liken it to being at aristocratic. I like to kind of elevate the experience. So it's an aristocratic experience where you're brought together by the host and you're expected to converse. And so I always say that you've always got your first line, where are you going or where are you from, so you've got that. But because you have that forced situation, I've actually just returned from that journey last week. So this is a 27-hour journey from Moncton, New Brunswick to Kitchener, where I live. It's 27 hours, and I was in my cabin, and then I went to dinner, and there was sometimes there's a seating for two, and sometimes it's for four. So I was on my own. There was a woman, they're about my age, and they just said, okay, well, you can sit here. And so I sit down, and it's like, okay, well, you're going to chat, and we had a very interesting conversation. She's a big train fan, and it turns out she's a special effects person for the National Film Board, has worked in there for 30 years. So I just got into a really interesting discussion with her about her work and about trains. And I think there's something about that the setup, I guess, that allows you to almost kind of play along with the game. You know, you are a dinner guest at an aristocratic manor house if you want, and you have to say, so what do you do? What do you know? And it's expected. So it's an interesting, and we have met some people are not necessarily, you know, sometimes it's a little bit more forced, but I have met some really interesting people in that way. So, and my daughter was 5 when she started traveling, and we've done this trip 15 times, and she grew to really love that because she was at first just a, you know, as a child listening to adult conversations, and then she became more involved in it, you know, it was like her first sort of act of being a grown up. So yeah, it was part of the ritual of the travel. Try it. I just try it next time you have an
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. I actually have yet to do a sleeper train. And I'd like to be able. I almost did it the last time I was in the UK. I was gonna take the I think Caledonian Sleeper, that's what it's called.
Oh yes, yeah.
From London to Edinburgh. But I didn't end up I don't remember what I ended up doing, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think I left on an earlier train.
fair enough. Yeah, the sleepers are a wonderful experience. It's just I've done this one 15 times. 15 is more 20 times. And I've traveled from Paris to Berlin on a sleeper.
Yeah.
And it's very nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we started, we were talking about how, quite elevated these experiences can be. I think I know you'll agree, like train travel sort of evolved in the 20th century, right? Where it's sort of but with the rise of car culture in the 1950s, especially in North America.
Mm.
See a sort of very bare bones train experience for a while. And things are starting to change again. Do you think that has a lot to do with um, environmentalism, carbon footprints? Some people, especially people my age, who want to have experiences, and or people of other generations who want to call back to another time. Like, what do you think is the reason for this renaissance in the train experience?
Yeah, I think well, so if you look back at the Eurail passenger passages ticket sales that would kind of started in the 1950s, and they grew steadily until the 90s. And in the 90s, the European Union deregulated the airline industry, so that's when cheap flights came into being. So, you know, you could in Europe, especially, you could fly for a very small amount to, you know, countries all over Europe, and so your rail ticket sales just dropped dramatically, and it became unfashionable. You know, flying by air was the thing to do. So this kind of trend continued till about 2018, and a group of Swedish journalists started talking about the impact of a climate change, flying change shame. And so this started to become a real issue that people sort of latched onto, that they did not realize so much that how much an impact there was with flying. And that has had a big impact on individual choices, and as well on legislation, because more recently France has passed a law that said that they don't allow flights of less than 2 hours within the country where you
Yeah.
can travel by train. And so I think that it's sort of the two things that are kind of happening. But yeah, climate change for sure has had a change, had a big impact. And in 2022, the the number of Eurail tickets has doubled.
Mm.
The sales have doubled from 2019. So it's all like taking COVID out of the equation. So what's happening now is that because of this increase in demand, the companies and the government are investing heavily. So there's a lot of new routes in Europe being restored, a lot of additional like overnight routes and short routes, and the Channel Tunnel between England and France, that is actually run by one company, but it's actually open, and apparently there's going to be more trains that are going to be using the tunnel. And I think they're predicting from 2018, the number of trains from London to Amsterdam will increase from 5 a day now to 14 a day in
Wow.
2028. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's kind of being driven by the demand. It's sort of a circular thing. So the climate change has started, but now it's kind of driven, and it's also kind of affected the luxury market because what I'm talking about is like the regular train.
Yeah,
But there's like a whole group of luxury train travel that is very expensive, but it's beautiful, and trains are being refurbished and lines being restored. So yeah, it's exciting time.
yeah, absolutely. And we're thinking geographically with Europe, it's a really small area. So it's like, like yeah, you can take a plane, but it's really not that far away. Especially if you start factoring in driving to the airport, going through security and all that stuff, and compare that to how long it takes you just to go to the train station and get on the train.
It's a big difference, and it's also just the kind of experience of it. I would say, 6 hours of playing, people just are trying to kill time on
Yeah,
that. But 6 hours on the train, it kind of gives you that time. I feel like
yeah,
that time is given to you because you have that space to read or write or whatever you want to do. So it feels more like I always say, I feel like it's like a retreat experience for me.
absolutely. Yeah, you know, I've always loved trains, but sometimes in parts of my life, I've leaned a little heavier on the driving side. And so I go to New York City a lot, I'll drive down there. It is so stressful. It is so stressful to drive, for those of us who live in Connecticut, driving down 91 and then 95, it's very stressful. So it's just so nice to go to Union Station and just, take the train and just read for 3 hours rather than be angry at people for 3 hours.
Yeah, well, for sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got to fly the option of flying or driving. Those are definitely more stressful. And it's interesting because in Canada and the US, our trains are often very long journeys. I mean, we have obviously
Yeah,
in some centers you have like the commuter trains, but you have those longer journeys. So the experience can be a little bit different. It is a more of an investment, but it's also a different kind of travel. I mean, there's all kinds of people talk about being able to work on trains, being writers who have written on trains. And I know that Amtrak is speaking about the renaissance and demand. I know that Amtrak has committed to something like 50 billion to increase the number of trains and upgrade track
absolutely.
and stations and so on. So I think, we haven't got high-speed train here in North America, which
Yeah.
is odd because you would think this would be the place for it.
Yeah. With our vast distances, between, our coasts of Canada and the US.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I think that would
uh,
be
of
fortunate.
course, I subscribe to Amtrak's YouTube channel, and they announced recent. Well, I saw it yesterday, but maybe they didn't. I don't think they announced it yesterday, but that they were seemed like it was becoming a reality that they were going to put a new track between Dallas and Houston and Texas. And I'm like, wow, if they're putting it in Texas where people are super car culture heavy, they must be
Yeah,
doing quite well.
Well, I think I think it's an idea that is kind of gaining traction
Yeah.
because it's, there's a climate issue, but uh, it is, flying can be complicated and
Mhm.
like you say, sometimes by the time you drive your car, by the time you go through security,
Yeah.
it's not that much shorter. You have the additional stress. So I think that that demand is going to only increase, and so hopefully the services will meet that demand.
Yeah, and then you just choose what's right for you in terms of a consumer. Like, okay, this makes more sense for me to take the train versus driving or flying. Just having more options is always good.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe some of us will want to go by stagecoach in the future. So
Well, that's an option, although they're not very comfortable, and apparently it's not a very nice ride.
no, no, not at all.
I
Uh,
like the idea of the private car that
yeah.
when my research I found out that Sarah Bernhardt, the French
Oh yeah.
actress, did an American tour on a beautiful Pullman designed train. I think she had four cars, her own car, which would have had all kinds of luxuries, and then the car for her the actors in her show, and then two baggage cars.
Wow.
And this would have been. I was thinking it's like Taylor Swift doing
Yeah.
getting around. She would have been, doing this tour around America on this luxury train and being pulled by an engine, wherever she went. And it's a kind of different way of getting around for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing to be at that level of fame and or wealth to just have your own space. I mean, that's the older equivalent of a private jet, I suppose, where you have your own space.
Yeah, well, there people would have invested in their private carriage, and they would have, had it designed, had it beautifully designed and very kind of luxurious to their taste. And then they could take the train, they could hook that train onto a train going where they wanted to go. So if they were in Chicago and they wanted to go to New York, they're just saying, pay a fee. Can I just, hook my train at the back of your train and take me to New York City?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I just want to let the audience know that if you want to ask any questions, please put those into the Q&A section. We can answer those at any time. Or if you have your very own story of train travel or trains, that'd be great too. Um, uh, and so we talked a lot about travel in Western Europe and North America. But there is a part of the book where you talk about going to Poland um, in the 90s, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what experience that was for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I went to Poland. It was early 90s. It was just after after the end of communism, and so things were really kind of developing. And I went with my partner at the time, and we took the train from Warsaw to a small seaside village called Sopot, and we were in a compartment. We had bought tickets for the compartment, and it was the train was packed. Like the compartment had our six people in it, but out in the corridor, it was absolutely packed. People were sitting on suitcases, and so it was all very kind of an odd experience to begin with. I just sort of felt like I was in a different time. I did not speak the language. My partner did. And suddenly, the woman across from me started yelling at me, and I had no idea what she was yelling at me about. And I asked my partner, and he didn't said he didn't know, And so he finally she calmed down. But I think what we kind of determined is that I think she wanted me to give up my seat. And maybe as a Westerner, I was taking up a seat, but it was very disconcerting to be on this train and have this person yelling at me for what I thought was for no reason. But anyway, she did calm down and eventually, we kind of had the rest of the ride home was fine. But
Yeah.
the experience of living and once I got into lived in Sopot, I discovered that I was quite isolated. I was teaching, but I was quite isolated in my flat. And I soon discovered that there was a train that went between the three cities, like there's a tri-city area between Gdynia, Gdansk, and Sopot, and the train became a kind of freedom and escape for me because I could, go and just go out for the day and then just take a train to Gdansk or to Gdynia, whatever. But one day, the first day that I went on the train, I sat down. I had my ticket. I sat down, and the ticket inspector came through, and then he started yelling at me. So, and I was like, "What? I have my ticket. What's going on?" And fortunately, there was young woman there who spoke English, and she said, "You were supposed to like stamp your ticket when you get on the train." So I had my ticket, but I hadn't stamped it. But so yes, this was in post-communist Poland. I got yelled at quite a bit. It was definitely a learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I wonder, you didn't touch upon this too much in your book. Amongst all the very many things you talked about, but there's what comes to mind a little bit when I was reading that part about Poland was India and how train travel is there and how different that is culturally. Maybe a lot more stuff going on, a lot more action. um Jesse says that he got yelled at on a train in Poland too in 2006. They didn't
Oh,
like me taking photos of the train station in post-communist Poland.
oh, very interesting. Oh, I wonder where that was. What train station?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they'll let us know.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
Yeah. I've never been yelled at on a train. Oh, he says I was there to see my sister town.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's some very, some of they're very protective, I guess, of their country, but they feel free to express themselves.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I had a lovely time and people were wonderful, just that they were very expressive sometimes.
Yeah.
There's also when I took the train once from Warsaw to Prague. Again, this time I was traveling alone, and I was in the compartment, and the train stopped, and I just heard this kind of sound of heavy boots and the compartment doors going opening and closing, and there was this kind of great sense of fear because I thought, what's happening,
Mhm.
Um, and not knowing the language is even worse, but it turns out that we were at the border and there's border guards, but they were so aggressive. It felt
Oh,
like, like the army was coming on. So they just opened
yeah.
the door and, kind of yell documents in, and we said, okay, I'll get my passport. Hopefully everything's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a scary movie from a war or something.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I just, that sound of heavy boots just kind of stayed with me.
Yeah, yeah. Jesse asks a historical question. So it seems that class rather than race was the big divider on 19th century English trains. Do you know if maybe the Irish or
Oh.
others were racial others on these English trains?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know for certain, but I can imagine that they may have been. I mean, that's been the more recent history of the Irish. And I think that they were the class consciousness was very, very prominent on those British trains. So I can't say for certain, but I think that I would not surprise me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, Let's see. Catherine says, has a question. What's the fanciest, beautiful, historic Orient Express type train I can take today? Oh, that's a good question.
So the Orient Express is, I think it's just being renovated, and it goes from Paris to Istanbul. And yeah, if you look up the Orient Express, and it'll have some amazing photographs of this train. I can't remember the name of the company that is running it now, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I know there's a company called Belmont, and they do many types of luxury trains, which I love to look at, and not sure when I'll be able to afford to go on one. But of course, my favorite is the Belmont Scotsman, which takes you up to Scotland. I love Scotland. Um, but there's even one that's like the Andean Express, and it takes you up to the Andes. I don't think to Machu Picchu, but up to the Andes. So. Uh,
yeah.
there are quite a few all over the place.
Yeah, and I think that from what I've read, there's a lot more coming on track,
Yeah,
in the coming years, because I think that this form of luxury travel is really a growth area. So
absolutely.
yeah, it would be fun to do one of those luxury trips.
Yeah, yeah. And train travel, I mean, going back really to the essence of the book, train travel is luxurious in its own way. It gives you time, it gives you um space to sort of look out and see the world going by. One thing that comes to mind is when you were taking that trip with your daughter, and at some point you're both reading, but then because the movement of the train sort of lulls you to sleep. And I just love that imagery of being lulled to sleep by the moving of the train.
It's yeah, it is. I mean, there's two things that's like because that happened that's in a sleeper car. So there's two things that happen in that moment, and is the fact that we are alone in the cabin, and so it became we always took the train at the end of June at the end of a school year, and so it became that time for us just alone. So we were sort of separated from work and for her school, and we had that it just sort of felt like we're in this little cave, the two of us. And so we could, have our books and, bring our snacks and just enjoy that time. Um, but then once you go to bed, then you get the bunks out and then you get in bed. And it really feels like as adults, we don't get cradled enough. I
Yeah.
think that it truly is the experience of being cradled, you're just that gentle motion and just sort of lulls you to sleep. And I think the thing what I figured out with trains for me is that you know you you are moving forward, you are moving, you can see that you are moving, but there's a stillness that comes, sort of an inner stillness that comes from it. So you feel like you're in sort of constant movement, but that you yeah, it kind of just sort of generates an inner stillness, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the imagery of a mother and child also sharing this time, and it made me think like, oh, I should take my mom on a on a train trip.
Well, it is, I think it is, it is sidestepping your life when you do that. I mean, because if you take a trip, you often like you are thinking when I get to the place, that's when the trip will start. But if you can start the trip the moment you kind of leave your door and walk, to a train station, that is yeah, it's kind of like that forced confinement, forced, sort of opportunity for you to spend time with somebody or just by yourself. This last time I did was the first time that I did it by myself, because I've been traveling with my daughter for so long, but I had to go down to for a book tour down there. And yeah, so then I was in a cabin by myself, which was also really nice, just to have that time to like stare out the window. And it was interesting too. I was talking to the woman I met at dinner who was the worked for the National Film Board, and she was talking about some of the flowers on the side of the road, and she was wondering what they were. And one of the things, again, going back to the early days of train travel, was Victor Hugo was talked about the fact that, the train was so fast that people would get bored because they no longer had that connection to nature. They could no longer look out the stagecoach window and see that that flower was whatever flower it was. Now they were just a blur. And so they could no longer enjoy the kind of pastoral landscape outside their window. And that's what actually led to people started reading on the train because they were so bored because it was going so quickly. And that was that initiated the W.H. Smith, which is a major sort of book retailer in the UK. They started setting up bookstalls in
Yeah,
train stations.
it's so fascinating to read about that. I had no idea.
It was fun for me to discover that too. And I found a picture of one, which was this beautiful picture of this big. I kept thinking a book stall was like about the size of a hot dog cart,
Yeah, yeah.
But they had these really quite large book stalls, and sold a lot of books. And they had a subscription service so that you could order a book and then
Okay.
pick it up the next day.
Oh,
So
wow.
it became and they had these stalls throughout England. So
Oh, that's awesome. Um, yeah. Well, connecting speed here. Have you been on any speed trains? Like the Japanese bullet trains?
I have not. No, I have. Uh, no, I haven't. I was thinking about when I was in France, but I haven't. I have not been on a speed train. Um, I think that probably the fastest I've been is on what in Europe is about 200 miles an hour, but not yet.
Yeah, yeah. That was Nikki's question. I should have said that.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's interesting because then you're moving again into that what Victor Hugo is saying because I think we could handle a little bit more speed now. So like if you're on a train that's going 100 miles an hour, you can still look out the window and but if it's going more than that, then we're going back to the old territory.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. I think it starts to feel like you're on a plane and it's just whizzing by, and then you kind of go internal, with that. So, but I think that we've adjusted to that. I mean, I think people are used to, reading newspapers and reading a book or doing work. So,
Yeah.
that idea of looking out the window in those trains maybe just a different experience.
Mhm, mhm. I mean, even film, I sometimes I notice when I watch a movie that's just come out versus an older movie, maybe even from 20 years ago, just like they have a lot of scenes where things are going around in a circle and something, and I'm just it's a little
Yeah.
bit too much for me.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too about the people being bored on the trains and there's also a story about um Paul Allen, oh my goodness, I just Allen, the publisher. I can't think of his other name is Allen. Anyway, he had been visiting Agatha Christie, and went to the Exeter train station to return to London and didn't find anything very interesting there. So had came up with the idea of having cheap, accessible paperbacks. So the idea of the Penguin books, those very kind of popular British books, came about because he was, couldn't find the right reading material for the train when he was at the train station in after visiting Agatha Christie.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing that that started there. That's there's that connection to travel because we don't think of publishing industry being much more connected to stillness and uh not really the, transportation, but
Yeah, I think there was quite a few writers that actually enjoyed writing on the train, and many have, well, but some have written a great deal on the train. So there is that definitely that connection. I think Anthony Trollope was one who also wrote a lot on the train.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember that Amtrak maybe a couple of years ago had a program where you can win a scholarship to ride on a train. Uh,
Mm.
and well, it had to be more than a couple of years ago because that was the pandemic. But um, uh, I thought, wow, that's a great idea to just bring that back to that time. I mean, a train is a great place for a rider because there's just so much movement. There's stuff outside and inside um
Yeah.
to mine from.
Yeah, absolutely. That the observer aspect of being a writer is there for you. You can listen to conversations at the train on the other day. There was a young woman having this fierce fight with her sister on the phone, and the dialogue would have been, perfect if you were writing about, a young woman and her, kind of relations with her sister, So, but it was there for the taking.
Yeah. Yes, I have heard so many different things on the train. Um, yeah, it's very interesting to just see all it is a very democratic space, really. I mean, you just see so many different kinds of people. And it's just so fascinating to be in that space where you can sit and you're not doing an activity, you're not eating, you can really just observe if you want to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that the idea of it being democratic is a really important aspect of it as well, because it has historically been, served a great number of great purpose for a lot of people. It is basic transportation, being able to get away from their home or go to work, and it became a kind of yeah, sort of central to their lives in a way that is not so much there now, but hopefully will return.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. I just want to see if anyone else has any questions, and we'll start closing things up. Um, make sure that I put the link to the book again, because I want everyone to buy it. There we go. Um, well, thank you so much, Pamela. This has been so great. And I really want to thank you and thank our audience and encourage you all to buy the book. I have it here. I can just also hold it up if this thing lets me. Oh, here we go. I gotta put it next to me. There's the book. Yes, please go and buy it. I put the link in the chat. Um, Great. Well, thanks again, Pamela.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been great. Have a good night to you and to all of our folks in the audience.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining in.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.